All right, strap in, everybody. Today, we are going deep on the JFK assassination.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah, it is. And we've got some really interesting stuff from the Kennedy Assassination Chronicles. They've got all this research, challenging the official narrative.
Okay.
Yeah, like alternative theories and evidence, really questioning those Warren Commission conclusions.
I mean, it's a case that just never dies, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And the first article just dives right in. Claims of Oswald impersonators in Texas before the assassination.
What?
Yeah, Chris W. Courtwright, the author, he found all these witness reports. A man looking like Oswald. Several towns in early October 1963.
So just weeks after Oswald supposedly returns from Mexico City.
Exactly. And
Wow.
get this, some witnesses even describe this Oswald with a woman and children.
Oh, wow.
Descriptions vary, though, so it makes you wonder, who are these people? Trying to throw investigators off, or were they part of something bigger?
Right, right.
And there's specific details that make you think, impersonation. Like a mechanic at a machinery company in Alice, Texas, remembers the name Oswald, even mentions the USMC. And then employees at a radio station in Pleasanton remember Oswald bragging about just being in Mexico. Almost like someone was planting these false leads, But why? To frame Oswald or hide the real people behind it all?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, these sightings, if they're true, they suggest maybe some kind of intelligence operation, maybe even using Oswald doubles. Makes you think, doesn't it?
For sure. Okay, shifting gears now. Let's look at the medical evidence around JFK's head wound. This gets complicated.
Oh, yeah, medical stuff always gets tricky.
Brad Parker's article examines the conflicting statements from the doctors at Parkland Hospital. And it's, shocking, really.
Really?
So Dr. Robert McClellan, he treated Kennedy, right? Describes a massive head wound, cerebellum exposed. But Dr. Marion T. Jenkins, he was the chief of anesthesiology, first says the cerebellum's extruding, then changes his story later.
That is strange.
And then Dr. Malcolm Perry, he also describes similar damage, but then downplays his own observations later on. Like everyone's memory is, a bit fuzzy about that day.
Yeah.
Parker even digs into the specific quotes from the medical reports, the interviews. You can see how their stories changed over time.
Almost like a really messed up game of telephone, right?
Yeah, exactly. The article even questions the order of events in Trauma Room 1, like when did certain doctors arrive, challenges Dr. Jenkins' claim about getting there before the tracheotomy was done. You have to wonder, were they pressured to change their stories?
Yeah.
Or just trying to, make sense of it all?
Yeah, I mean, it was chaos, right?
It was. But this scrutiny of the medical evidence makes you question how reliable eyewitness accounts can be, especially under pressure. Makes you think, maybe someone was trying to hide something.
Deliberately. About the president's injuries, that's a dark thought.
It is. And we can't just ignore that possibility. Okay, so we've got possible Oswald impersonators, conflicting medical accounts. Now let's talk about the gun, the alleged murder weapon, the Mannlicher Carcano rifle.
Okay.
This article goes deep on the forensic stuff, and it really raises some big doubts about what we've been told.
Oh, so they're really going for it.
Walter F. Graff and Richard R. Bartholomew, the authors, they don't hold back. They zero in on inconsistencies with the ammunition clip, how it was handled, described, the whole thing.
What kind of inconsistencies?
For one, the crime scene photos, they show the clip sticking out of the rifle. But that's not how the Mannlicher Carcano works. The clip should eject it after the last shot. And no fingerprints on the clip. So Graff and Bartholomew, they're saying the rifle could have been planted.
Wow.
Then they do their own tests with a similar rifle. Find out the clip doesn't catch, like some claimed. It should have ejected cleanly. And get this, they went through expert testimony from the HSCA hearings, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, found all this confusion, contradictory statements about how the rifle even loads.
Okay, so they're really picking apart the official story.
They are. And their analysis of the gun, it throws a wrench into everything. Makes you wonder, was it even the right gun?
Yeah.
Or was it all staged?
That's what these deep dives do, right? They make you question everything.
They really do.
It's amazing. When you really dig into the evidence in the JFK case, almost every detail has been debated, scrutinized, reinterpreted, you name it.
It's like one giant puzzle. Some pieces fit, some don't. And some might be from a totally different puzzle.
Exactly. And speaking of puzzles, the Zapruder film, that home movie of the assassination, it's got a wild history, man.
Oh, yeah, the 8mm footage, all grainy, that everyone's been analyzing frame by frame for years.
That's the one. The Chronicles actually, they've got a transcript of a public hearing, the Assassination Records Review Board, back in '97. They were trying to figure out who actually owned the film, if the public had a right to see it.
So even owning the film was controversial. What's the deal there?
Well, Zapruder, the guy who shot it, he sold it to Time Life magazine right after the assassination. And then, get this, in '75, they sold it back to the Zapruder family.
Okay, interesting. So the family owned it, but everyone could see copies, right?
Not exactly. In '78, the family gave it to the National Archives for safekeeping, but they kept the legal ownership.
Gotcha. So this review board, were they trying to, like, get the government to own it so everyone could see it?
Yeah, but it was tricky. They said, yeah, the Zapruder film is historically important, but they also had to deal with, private property rights and maybe paying the family for it.
Right, that makes sense. Did the hearing give any clues about how people saw the film back then?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The transcript is like a snapshot, all these different opinions about the film, legal experts, regular folks, even discussions about, like, was the film tampered with?
Tampering, man, every part of this case is suspicious.
Yeah.
So what happened in the end? Did the government get the film?
Well, the board said they wanted to transfer ownership to the government, but Congress had the final say.
Just goes to show, huh? The JFK assassination, it's still complicated, even when we're talking about a home movie.
It really shows how important transparency is. Public access to evidence, especially in huge historical events. It's easy to get caught up in the conspiracy theories, but we can't forget the human side of it. Real people.
Yeah, definitely. Real people right there in the middle of it. Their stories matter too. Speaking of, the Chronicles has a piece about Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service agent who was driving the limo in Dallas that day.
Wow, yeah. Kellerman was right there in the front seat, feet away from JFK when the shots happened. His testimony to the Warren Commission, it's a first-hand account of those moments right after. Really chilling.
It must have been terrifying. Does he talk about, like, what happened?
He does. He describes the confusion, the panic, everyone realizing the president was hit badly. Reading his words, it really makes you feel the human cost of that day, the fear, the grief.
Right. It wasn't just an event. It was a tragedy. People's lives were shattered. And it wasn't just those in the motorcade either. The Chronicles also looks at Officer J.D. Tippit, the Dallas policeman Oswald, supposedly killed right after the assassination.
Tippett's death, it was a big part of the case against Oswald. But like everything else in this case, the details are, well, they're messy. A lot of inconsistencies and questions.
Like what?
Well, the Chronicles points out problems with the timeline and questions how reliable some of the witnesses were.
So, doubt about what happened to Tippit.
Enough to make you wonder. The article also looks into Tippett's background, hints at possible connections to organized crime, suggests maybe his death wasn't even connected to the assassination.
Whoa, that would change everything about Oswald, right? If Tippit's death was something else entirely, then Oswald's motive is gone.
Exactly. It would completely change how we see Oswald that day. Was he running from the assassination or caught up in something else?
It shows you, even small details matter. In a case like this, they can change everything.
Every piece of evidence, every witness, every person involved, it just adds another layer to the Kennedy assassination. It's like a tangled web leading everywhere.
In trying to untangle it, you got to look at everything, question everything, be open to the possibility that the truth is, well, way more complicated than we think. Which brings us back to the big mystery. Why did Oswald do it? Why would this ex-Marine who liked Marxist ideas assassinate the president?
Is the question, right? And the Chronicles adds to it. They've got an article comparing Oswald to other assassins throughout history, I mean.
You mean like John Wilkes Booth?
Yeah.
What was his name? Leon Sogos?
Yeah, exactly. The author's point is most assassins, they want credit. They want to make a statement, be remembered,
But Oswald, he denied it all. Said he was a patsy.
Right, and that's what's so strange about him. If he did it, why not say why? Why not leave his mark on history?
It's almost like him saying he's innocent. It goes against everything we think we know about assassins.
Exactly, and it raises more questions about Oswald. Was he alone, driven by something we haven't figured out? Was he a pawn in some bigger game, or is there something we're not seeing at all?
It's enough to make your head spin.
It really is. Not having a clear motive from Oswald, it leaves a big hole in our understanding.
It seems like every time we try to understand it, we end up with more questions. It's crazy. All these different angles to this case. Witnesses, forensic evidence, even the people involved. But we haven't really talked about, like, the politics of the early 60s. Things were pretty intense back then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't understand something like the Kennedy assassination without looking at the bigger picture. The historical context, the social and political stuff going on.
Right. The early 60s, it was a crazy time. Cold War at its peak, civil rights movement, and Kennedy dealing with, like, all these foreign policy challenges.
Yeah, and the Chronicles actually has this article focuses on one of the biggest moments of Kennedy's presidency, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, yeah, that was a close one.
Mm.
Um, for anyone who might not know,
Yeah.
could you, like, give us a quick recap of what happened?
Sure. So in 1962, the U.S. finds out the Soviets are putting nuclear missiles in Cuba, 90 miles from Florida.
Yikes.
Yeah, it was a 13-day standoff, superpowers, on the brink of nuclear war.
Can't even imagine the pressure Kennedy was under.
Oh.
So this article, it looks at how he handled it all.
It does. It examines the factors that influenced his decisions, also delves into, like, the secret talks between the U.S. and the Soviets, how they managed to avoid, well, total disaster.
And it's wild. So this crisis, it must have had a huge impact on Kennedy, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, some people saw him as a hero, others not so much. Some thought he was too weak, others too reckless.
Yeah, I can see how something that intense could create, like, ripple effects. Maybe even play a role in something like, well, an assassination. Do you think there's a direct connection between the Cuban Missile Crisis and, Kennedy's death?
It's tough to say. We can't know for sure, but it definitely ramped up the tension, created this atmosphere of fear and paranoia. It's not crazy to think that some people, maybe those who felt threatened by Kennedy, might have, seen him as a target.
And speaking of fear and paranoia, we can't forget about the anti-communist stuff going on. The Red Scare. That had a big impact too, right?
Huge. The Chronicles talks about this too, how this fear, it affected how people saw figures like Oswald. He was openly into Marxist ideas. It also looks at the FBI and CIA, how they were monitoring and investigating suspected communists.
Okay, so we've got a president who just stared down a nuclear threat, Cold War paranoia everywhere, and an alleged assassin with communist ties. That's like a recipe for a conspiracy theory, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And that's just a small part of the political landscape back then. You had the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War. It was a tense time.
So after this deep dive into the Kennedy Assassination Chronicles, what are your main takeaways? What really sticks out?
For me, it's the unanswered questions. Even with all the investigations, the books, the documentaries, we still don't know for sure who killed Kennedy and why.
It's like the more we learn, the less we know.
Yeah, every new piece of evidence, every witness, every new historical thing we find, it just makes it more complicated.
It shows you the power of this event, how it still affects us. The Kennedy assassination, it's like a wound that never healed, a mystery we can't let go of.
Right, and it reminds us that history isn't always a clear story. It's messy, contradictory, and sometimes we just don't know for sure.
And that's what's so great about these deep dives. We can explore all the different sides, deal with the uncertainty, and keep asking those hard questions.
Exactly. We might never have all the answers, but looking for the truth is important.
Well said. And I want to leave our listeners with this. We talked about the Zapruder film, that footage of the assassination. But imagine if it never existed. What if it was lost, destroyed, hidden? How would we understand the assassination today? What stories would we believe? It's a scary thought. Makes you realize how fragile history is, how easy it is to change the story, and how important it is to question what we see, what we hear, and what we're told. This is The Deep Dive, signing off.